about that point?
Yes.
Explain it to the viewers here tonight.
Yeah, the broader problem, first of all, really is that human beings, unique among the animal kingdom, are able to conceptualize, to come up with visions of how things should be. But then when we try to put that into practice, it doesn't always come out the way that we would like, or even that we espouse. One very popular kind of criticism of people, of other people, is that they're hypocrites. It's very hard for us not to be hypocritical in the kind of the very basic sense that there's a gap between what we espouse and what we do. That's kind of part of the nature of being human, which some was hope to improve upon eventually.
Right.
So transhumanists, of course, have a very well-defined view compared to many others of the human future, of what we can become, of what's desirable, of how noble we can become, how we can improve our moral being, and so on, how we can improve psychologically. It doesn't mean that we can actually do that today. And so I think, just like any other movement, we see some of the same problems as we've seen in any political, social, philosophical movement. Personalities will get involved, and there tends to be a territorial dominance where anybody coming into a movement or a set of ideas will tend to claim too much for themselves. They'll try to redefine things, whoever controls the present controls the past, and so on, to make their own vision or their own version of a vision seem more significant. And I think that's certainly been true in transhumanism. I found that, for instance, those who describe themselves as extropians, those who affirm the principles of extropy, they've often been forced into certain political molds.
Yeah, I've heard that. From what I saw, is that people tried to, I don't know if it was marginalize extropians or try and pigeonhole extropians, but there certainly was a concerted effort, it seemed, to pigeonhole extropians as libertarians, and like it was a political movement more than anything else, which I never really quite understood. But is that your reading on the situation as well?
Yes. I mean, it's hard to separate out what is unintentional from what's intentional without being inside somebody's mind, and even then they may not be sure themselves. But it seems fairly clear to me that that was certainly happening, and I think some of it probably was intentional, a desire to marginalize, to bring their own sort of political views into prominence. And if you look back, even, I mean, obviously there's a certain element of truth in that if you look at especially early extropians, many of them did describe themselves as libertarian. And indeed, I described myself as a libertarian early on. However, there's a couple of important points to make about that. One of which is that, most fundamentally, the whole view of, the whole philosophy of extropy is based on the principles of extropy. And if you look at those, never, ever in any version of those principles did it say that you have to be a libertarian to be an extropian, or to affirm the principles of extropy. Instead, it talked about things like open society, self-direction, and those ideas, which are much more general, and which certainly to many of us have seemed to fit a generally libertarian kind of political view very well, but not necessarily uniquely so.
Yeah, that's my take as well, that it's not uniquely libertarian, but it certainly has some similarities.
Well, it fits it very well, because if you look at a general libertarian view of the world, it's really about removing limits, as in the rest of the ideas of extropy, removing limits to lifespan, removing limits to be stuck on this one planet, removing limits to intelligence. A libertarian politics is generally about removing government limits.
Yeah.
But that's, if you look at the core of the extropian principles, they're really all about improving things, challenging things, perpetual progress, not being stuck into any kind of ism, in fact. It's probably the most self-critical view that I know of, apart from pancritical rationalism, which is something many extropians also like, the idea that you have to be willing to criticize everything, including your own fundamental principles. So it can't be tied to any one political ideology.
Okay.
Now, having said that, a lot of people, since I've said that in the last few years, some people who are still hardcore libertarians, and I no longer call myself that, have been quite upset with me. That it's as though I betrayed something. But again, the principles have never explicitly pointed to libertarian politics as being the only thing extropians can be about.
Can be, sure. And this question did bring up some members here have started to ask some questions, or some viewers in the channel here tonight. One person wonders, I hate to get a little bit off the subject, but I did see a couple of questions from viewers. And one person wondered about transhumanist manipulation changes to people that may be coming here in the next 10, 20 years about computer chips in microelectronics, as far as becoming cybernetic, having computer chips within our brains. Which
Actually, Alex, can I stop you a second?
Yes.
Just before we move on to that, because that's kind of a fairly different area.
Yeah,
I just add one more point before we go on to that.
Please do.
About the way sort of things have been rewritten and rewriting in the past. One thing that I found quite disturbing, actually, in regard to transhumanism, the principle that Extropy is one well-developed vision of transhumanism, especially among some of the officials of the World Transhumanist Association, and I should mention I'm an honorary vice chairman of that organization. There's been a lot of rewriting of things, for instance, constantly citing Huxley as the founder or the coiner, definer of the term transhumanism, which to me, because I know that people saying that know very well the history, they know that's not true in the sense that, yes, he may have used that term, but I've never seen that term, and of course you can dig through history and find several people who've used the term in some kind of context. But that's certainly just a way of trying to sort of take away the credit and the origins of where it actually came from in the modern sense. That's actually been done right in front of me too, in an audience right in front of me, sort of very bold-faced, and I found that kind of disturbing.
Okay.
I think if the movement's going to be healthy, it needs to stick with the facts and acknowledge them and move on from there, rather than try to rewrite history. So anyway, that's my final word on that issue.
Oh, okay. Well, someone did ask a question, though, kind of related to that. One of the viewers tonight is asking, is extropianism a more complacent form or a less kind of pushy form of progress than transhumanism? Because to most people, a lot of general public might be turned off by the term transhumanism. It's like saying, humans are no good and that, we need to change. And he was just wondering if extropianism is a better fit for how people should approach change in the future.
Well, I think that's a very good question, and kind of an open question.
It is kind of open. It is kind of open.
Well, what I would say is that I think, at least the way that question was stated, intentionally or not, there's kind of an assumption there that I would question. That is that it seemed that the way that the question was phrased, which may not be intentional, was to see the principles of extropy and transhumanism as two rival ideas. Either one or the other.
That's the way it is.
That's not really the way it is, because you can look at it, the relation between principles of extropy and transhumanism in at least two useful ways, I think. One of which is to see transhumanism as the broader concept, the meta-concept, of which you talk about extropian transhumanism, because the principles of extropy define specifically what that's about. So that's one way of seeing it.
Okay.
In that case, it's not extropianism versus transhumanism. It's seeing as one version of it. Okay. The other way of looking at it, which many people have also suggested is quite reasonable, is to see the principles of extropy as actually a broader philosophy with broader application that can encompasses transhumanism. So again, it's not either or. It can be a much broader worldview, which, if you look at the principles, seem pretty clearly to point to transhumanism as a part of it, but aren't necessarily limited to transhumanism and its particular concerns of overcoming human limits.
Yeah. So I don't
think it's either or. But,
yeah.
But which is the better branding, if you like, or the better way of communicating these ideas? That's really yet to be determined. Some people think that the term extropy has been kind of spoiled by the way it's been written up and the way some people have tried to position it. Others say that the term transhumanism is strongly disliked. There's a recent discussion of that on the lists. Where Greg Egan, the Australian science fiction writer, was saying how whenever he's seen that term mentioned, it seems to put people off.
Yeah, but in fact, he said it's a good filter to find out who the crackpots are. Is what his exact.
I find kind of puzzling. I actually agree with James Hughes there that in my experience, I have not really seen that kind of reaction. That people are much more likely to be upset with the ideas contained within transhumanism than by the term itself.
Yeah, well, I've found that most of the people within transhumanist movement, extropians, immortalists, most of them seem to be very rational, and I would never, I hardly would consider them crackpots, and I don't know where he came up with that, because I know many transhumanists are fans of Greg Egan.
Yeah.
Everyone's read his science fiction, and he writes about these topics all the time. And I know he is familiar with many people, such as yourself and James Hughes, and many of the people who are within the movement. And where did he come up with this? They're all a bunch of crackpots.
I don't know. It's a couple of possibilities. It could be that it's really been his experience, but perhaps just the particular audiences in which he's seen that reaction and impressed themselves upon him. It could be that he's actually being disingenuous, and I really don't know if this is the case or not, but I've certainly seen this happen where people have said publicly things like this, even though privately they may certainly affirm themselves as being a part of that group or that worldview. I mean,